Captain Alan Gray, President and CEO of the Halifax Port Authority. Following the remarks, there will be an opportunity for questions from our friends in the media here today, and then we also have available the public public tour if you wanted to get a shot of container operations a little bit closer than that. So with that, I would like to call to the stage, or to the podium here, the Honourable Minister Alghabrah.
Good morning. Thank you very much for that introduction. And bonjour à tous. It's great to be back with you in Halifax. It's been a while, and I'm very lucky that the weather today is this good. Look, I just want to say that to all our friends and neighbors in Halifax, in Nova Scotia, in Atlantic Canada, the entire country is thinking of you after Hurricane Fiona. And I want everyone to know that your government is here for you. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced last week the creation of the $300 million Hurricane Fiona Recovery Fund. This will help those impacted by the storm and support long-term recovery efforts. This disaster is one example of how climate change and extreme weather events will continue to affect our lives and disrupt our transportation infrastructure and our supply chains. The Port of Halifax connects us to more than 150 countries. So clearly, we all know that the port is critical to Canada's economy and regional prosperity. Over the last 2 years, we've seen extreme weather events like Fiona, the effects of the pandemic, and global supply chains challenges put a lot of stress on our ports to maintain reliable connection between Canada and the rest of the world. So when we began the Ports Modernization Review in 2018, we had to consider new emerging factors as we were looking for ways to update this important network of Canada's port authority. Since then, global events have underscored the value of a resilient and strong supply chain in growing our economy, creating well-paying jobs, and addressing the continuing rising cost of living. I can now announce that we have completed the Port Modernization Review, which included input from communities, industry, and Indigenous stakeholders. And we intend to introduce legislative changes this fall to modernize how our port authorities are governed. On va introduire un projet de loi pour moderniser nos ports. These proposed legislative changes will help empower our ports to help make Canada's key gateways less congested, greener, and digitally modern. It would also mean making them more transparent and accountable in meeting these goals. These proposed changes will also include a modern framework for investment in our ports and ensure they line up with Canada's broader goals for economic growth, competitiveness, and national security. We will also look at ways our ports' assets can work together to support more efficient supply chains. These important legislative changes to modernize port operations were reinforced lately by the work of the Supply Chain Task Force. The task force, established earlier this year, consulted with industry representatives to find ways to make our supply chain stronger. And the task force advice will continue to be key to informing our national supply chain strategy. The actions from the Ports Modernization Review will help set a strong foundation in responding to the task force recommendations, especially when it comes to easing congestions at Canada's ports. I'm reviewing the task force final report that was published last Thursday with great interest, and will be making additional measures in response to their recommendations. We still have work to do, but we're making progress in the right direction. Looking ahead, Canadians can be assured that we're working hard to address inflation and the global rising cost of living, help them compete in global marketplace, trade more efficiently, and strengthen our transportation supply chain, including our ports. Merci. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now behind me you can see PSA Halifax Atlantic Hub, one of 2 container terminals here in Halifax, and one of the most efficient container terminals here in Canada. And it's at this terminal where we welcome the largest vessels calling on the east coast of North America. And for members of the media here, if you wanted to check your archive footage for CMA CGM Marco Polo, you could probably get some interesting B-roll. Just leave that out there for you. The impact of those vessels is huge on the economy of Nova Scotia. Our most recent economic impact study found that the total impact of the Port of Halifax on the province of Nova Scotia was $4.37 billion in economic output. And with that, generates over 22,000 jobs. And now for more on the Port of Halifax and the Halifax Port Authority, I would like to welcome Captain Alan Gray, President and CEO of the Halifax Port Authority.
Thanks, Lang. And thank you, Minister. Thank you for visiting the Port of Halifax and the announcement today. I'm sure the Halifax Port Authority, along with my colleagues in the other ports around Australia, appreciate the work that went into this review and look forward to the opportunity to review the legislation in its entirety when it comes out. At a high level, many of the things you were talking about, we at the Halifax Port Authority, along with many of our colleagues in the other ports around Canada, are already proactively engaged. Our focus on sustainability from a fully inclusive perspective embodies how we do our business, from our environmental best practice in the Green Marine Program, through our community engagement, our Port Community Liaison Committee that we have in Halifax, our supplier diversity policies that go beyond quotas and actually seek to create future capacity in our suppliers, our decarbonisation, our Green Corridor Agreement that we just signed with the Port of Hamburg, and our hydrogen cluster that now exists in the pier. Our innovation through the establishment of the pier and the work being done to create greater collaboration with our supply chain stakeholders and the city and provincial partners. Our digitalisation strategies that we're driving through the pier and with our partners across the other ports. To remain competitive and to support Canada's desire for a reliable and a resilient supply chain, greater collaboration across the supply chain is required. As strategic managers of the primary hubs for Canada's global markets, our ports are well positioned to provide influence beyond the port boundaries. To deliver the required infrastructure in a timely manner, a combination of responsible private investment and greater financial flexibility for port authorities will be an important component. Minister, we welcome the completion of the Port Modernisation Review and the Supply Chain Task Force report. We look forward to actively engaging with your office as we move forward with proposed legislative changes and implementation of the Supply Chain Task Force recommendations. Thank you very much.
And now, Alan and Minister, I'll get you just to stand by. We're going to have some questions and answers now, and I'll get Nadine from Transport Canada to moderate and then just call up the appropriate person to respond.
Perfect. So now we begin with the question and answer portion of this event. There'll be one question and one follow-up per reporter. So if anyone has any questions, go ahead.
For the Minister, where are we at with this legislation exactly? At what whereabouts is it? And what exactly, I mean, are there some sort of specifics that you can point to that will make some changes here?
Thank you for the question. Look, our government realized in 2018 that it was time to update how our ports are governed. And the review started in 2018. Then we were hit by the pandemic and new emerging challenges and opportunities surfaced, which gave us the opportunity to re-examine some of the assumptions that we made as we were conducting this review. I'm pleased to say that this review is completed. Based on that review and consultations, we are now soon ready to table a legislation in the House of Commons that will modernize how our ports are governed, how their operations are conducted. It will put emphasis on digitization and information sharing. It will put emphasis on ensuring that there is sustainability and green accountability. It will address many of the feedback that we heard from ports and their stakeholders. I'm not able to give specifics because I am obligated by parliamentary confidentiality that the specifics of the legislation cannot be shared until the legislation will be tabled. We are aiming to table it this fall. Once it's tabled, stakeholders, industry leaders, ports will be able to offer their thoughts, and parliamentary committee will study the legislation. But I'm looking forward to passing this legislation as quickly as possible because I know it will empower ports and enable them to do much more efficiently, reduce costs of operations, address some of the challenges that we have in a way that Canadians expect.
Do we have any more questions?
I'd like to ask.
Okay.
What are your biggest issues at the port, and how are measures like this potentially going to give you some help?
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, obviously the devil will be in the detail of the legislation, but the ports have been asking for more financial flexibility to enable it to invest properly in infrastructure. And I think if we get opportunities where we can work with partners in the supply chain and invest responsibly, and we have the flexibility within the financial mechanisms with appropriate governance, as the Minister has said, that will go a long way to assisting ports in delivering what's required. Also, having some influence outside the port, further down the supply chain, will be important as we move forward. We're well positioned to provide strategic governance and management over the whole supply chain with our partners.
More locally, what's your wish list here for the port here?
For us, we're doing a lot of it. So we've been pushing sustainability in the Port of Halifax. We're moving fast on the decarbonisation, and I believe that's probably the important part. Decarbonisation, while it's not our core activity here, is a very important thing for Canada. So assistance from the government in accelerating that decarbonisation program will be good for the community, but it'll also be good for the port. Because it actually also competitively positions Canadian ports ahead of other ports in the world if we head to that green port scenario much quicker.
Do you expect that to be in the new legislation?
I'm hoping it'll be in there.
Okay, perfect. Do we have any more questions?
Any issues with just trying to get the cargo out of here? Is there anything that's been looked? I'm sure that must have been looked at in this plan also. Is how to get this out and move it.
Yeah, the biggest challenges for us at the moment, and it's a whole supply chain issue, is as demand from shoppers is reducing, we're seeing a backup in retail stores, we're seeing a backup in distribution warehouses, so therefore cargo isn't moving away from rail ramps and therefore not wanting to move away from our container terminal. So you get a backup in the system. So there's going to be a little bit of time until we get some balance in supply and demand. As that happens, things will ease off in the supply chain. But the key for ports is to be able to get it off to inland ports, away from the terminals and into inland ports, into areas where there's a combination of rail and highway networks where they can feed into quite rapidly. So investment in inland ports is going to be important. The land is cheaper in those areas than it is in building more infrastructure in the port. So efficient use of inland ports will mean that we can maximise and optimise the port capacities that we have.
Okay, next question.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
for B-roll. I know you guys got some already at the pier space. There's also the public walkway if you want to see container terminal operations. I just saw a cargo ship coming in, so you might want to. We thought I saw it. Yeah. So there's opportunities there. Anyway, I'll let you guys do your job. Walkways that way. All right. Thanks, guys. You look seriously.
Oh, I know. Right?
Lane, I'm heading back with Dave.